Today, you're in for a treat as I'm speaking with Ashanti Bentil-Dhue. We have three main topics that we're going to cover. The first one is diversity and inclusion. The second one is starting and running your own business. And the third one is the online events. Enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meaning podcast. And today I am absolutely delighted to speak with Ashanti Bentil-Dhue. She's coming from the corporate world where she was actually in charge of regulatory and compliance with Santander Bank, Barclaycard, and Financial Ombudsman Service. And very interestingly, she co-created the UK first nationwide anti-racism and allyship project for women in HR. And as she said, it's an industry which has 83% female and white. That sounds to me a lot like the meetings and event industry. And she's now the CEO of EventMind, which provides training and consultancy for business looking to engage virtually with the audience. So the virtual part we're going to talk about today. And also she is the co-founder of 100 White Allies, Diversity Ally, and Black in Events, which are consultancies which provide support to organizations who want to be proactively anti-racist and inclusive. Ashanti, thank you so much for taking the time today.
No, thank you for having me. I know I'm probably a bit of a wild card choice because I did look through your previous guests. So no, it's lovely to be able to add some value.
Now, you know what? It's not wild card. As I say to my kids, everybody take their shower naked. And yes, there are people that are worldwide well-known, but also people that are not necessarily in the eyes of the media all the time, but are providing tremendous value, which is definitely your case. We met on Clubhouse. I heard you talking, and I thought, oh my God, I'd like to have her on the podcast. So thank you so much for being here today.
No, lovely. It's brilliant. And Clubhouse, you know, it's definitely a place of making meaningful connections like this one. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing how things change. And today we really want to talk, we're really going to talk about two topics which are definitely central in everything we're doing is the online on one hand and diversity and inclusion on the other hand. But before we get there, it looks like regulatory and compliance. When I read those two words, I was like, I remember when I was having my own event planning company, I was like, oh, regulatory compliance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was my foundational career. I went into the, financial sector in London and really cut my teeth in compliance, essentially. So, you know, my job was to read, understand, keep up to date with all of the rules, the codes and the regulations, and then, of course, communicate those to the bank in a way that they understood. But also a lot of that involved telling them when they couldn't say or do something that they wanted to say or do. And it was really during my time there in those environments that I began to work on diversity initiatives and also use events as the vehicle through which to communicate with others, you know, why it was really important that we were as diverse and inclusive as possible.
So basically you had two entries into the meetings and event world.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I didn't really even view it in that way. It's really ironic now that I am in the events industry and I'm around people who do organize corporate events for banks and brands. But when I was working for a bank, I just didn't see myself as an event planner at all. I just saw myself as, you know, the compliance consultant who also arranged these events. So very different outlook back then. And then when I decided to start my own business, of course, naturally, I gravitated towards building communities using events in order to build the brand of, you know, my business brand, but also my personal brand as well.
I totally understand. When you were in the still in the financial sector, so you started this first nationwide anti-racism and allyship project. I guess the answer is yes, but when do you really were faced the first time in your life about racism?
That's a good question. So as young, I can remember as being 4, actually, in school. There was a time, actually, when I was the only Black child in my class and year. So I remember back then understanding that we were different based on the way that I was treated by the other children and sometimes teachers. So I think that was my first and a very basic understanding of difference, albeit. But that was the first time I realized that I was different because I was being treated in a different way.
And when you say nicely treated in a different way, are you talking about mockery, bullying, racism remark?
Yes, so it's more speech, a lot of speech, assumptions about who I am, about where I was coming from, about my background, about my family. And most of the time, those assumptions incorrect, essentially. And so, yes, that it was more in those areas of what we would call now as microaggressions. And stereotypes, and then of course some bias, because as I say, there are certain assumptions that come along with looking the way I do, and so based on those assumptions, people would choose the way they would interact with me.
Interesting. Now that actually reminds me of my personal experience being in 7th grade, which is the first year of high school in Belgium. And being the only Jew in the class and the only Jew in the year. And I remember in the classroom, in the middle of the class, the guy behind me slowly leaning towards me and telling me that I was a dirty Jew.
Right.
And then standing up in the middle of the class, taking his head and banging his head on the desk and being called to the principal, of course, which, by the way, didn't give me anything. But the kids can be extremely harsh. My take on it is when you have somebody, a kid, being racist or commenting because you're Black, that's not coming from the kids. It's coming, first of all, from the parents and the education. Do you agree with that?
No, absolutely. I mean, children, we are imperfect humans, but we're not born necessarily inherently aware of difference, and then aware of how we can use differences to our advantage or exclude other people because of difference. So those are those extra dynamics that as children, our thinking faculties and our sense of power of reasoning hasn't developed at that age to be able to attach power, authority, and influence to difference. And so whilst a child can absolutely recognize different colors, for example, they don't necessarily understand any of the other political socio-structures that sit behind those. And so you're right, often what we are expressing, generally speaking, is as a result or reflective of what the adults around us and also the other kind of influences, it could be TV, etc. That's what we're reflecting as young people.
So fast forward, you're now in the financial world, and you obviously something happened so that trigger your desire to start this project. So what happened and how did you react to it?
I think it was that, I think, as I say, I'm fairly used to now being the only person of color, maybe the only Black woman in a room. And so I had been used to that, I suppose, for quite some years when I was in the financial industry. But I do remember one particular year and business that I was working for, and it was an awareness month. I can't recall what awareness month it was. And they were really scrabbling, essentially, for ideas of how to engage employees to raise awareness for this particular day. And so that's really when I just thought, well, why don't you just put on an event? It's the simplest thing you can do. We all work in the bank, and the bank does have disposable income, as in employees have disposable income. Of course, they donate if you put on an event that compelled them to engage in. And it just kind of happened naturally, whereby I just thought, well, why not I can step in. It's something I can arrange. And so that's what I did. I arranged this diversity and inclusion event where we involved local schools. So we went to a local primary school whereby the children there had never, ever been to the financial district area that I'd worked in, and never been to a bank. And all of those classes were mixed classes. There were lots of children from all over the world in those classes. So we arranged a diversity and inclusion event for the employees, and then we invited local school children to also partake in appropriate elements of that day to highlight the diversity that existed in the area within which the bank operated, but also highlight the diversity that existed within the employee groups that, in the bank as well.
And so when I was reading what you said about the HR world, 83% male and white, I had to read twice because I thought you were talking about the meetings and event industry.
Yeah. So you're right, actually. It's funny. It's the first time anyone's ever said that, but you are right. Yes. So HR as a discipline in the UK is over 80%. The stakeholders are female and white. Now, in terms of class, for example, it can vary in terms of the class that they may come from, but what that means is that you have individuals who may not have lived experience of difference or being a minority, but they are the individuals who often influence processes and systems that impact who gets paid, who gets promoted, who gets put on a training program, who gets fired, and who gets hired. And those are really important factors and entry points through which we can become more diverse. It's by hiring different people. It's by paying them the same as everybody else. It's by investing in them by way of resources and training. And so my mission, along with my other associates, was to really help those stakeholders who may not understand some of the issues at hand or even understand the amount of influence they have on those things, help them understand how they can contribute to becoming more diverse.
Absolutely. And I remember the discussion we had 10 years ago when I was very much involved with MPI, looking at 80% women in the industry and what it is today in the leadership compared to 10 years ago. And also when I've been to the last meeting, I've been despite the pandemic and before with MPI to finally see a more larger representation of people of color, finally. But I think also to your point, and again, it's a personal view. I look at what happened in the past and the history when any type of minorities have been discriminated. It's to find the right allies, to find the right people. So when you created 100 white allies and diversity ally and Black in events, what triggered that and what are you trying to achieve?
Absolutely. I mean, look, from my point of view, any way that I can, well, here's the first thing. And it's something that really only started to dawn on me recently when I looked at my inbox and the types of people who are messaging me. When I look at the people who turn up to the Clubhouse chats that I run, the people that engage with me on my LinkedIn posts, for example, it dawned on me that my very visibility and consistent visibility is in itself a way of creating more diversity, right? And so every time I post, every time I contribute, add value to a podcast like this, and somebody of color sees that, it does highlight to them or reflect that there is a place for them in this industry. And so that's the first thing. I didn't really realize or process that until very recently, that I don't really have to do anything except turn up consistently and be really good at what it is that I do and be somebody that adds value to other people. And by doing that consistently, I am, encouraging more diversity. So I'd say that's the first thing. Now, it's a bit of a responsibility because if it does mean that I want to dial back on activity or stay quieter, sometimes I say no. We have to be consistent because it matters to other people. I think the second thing is the mission is just to make it simple and accessible for organizations and companies to become more diverse, because it can be a very sensitive topic it can be extremely challenging for individuals who don't have to think about this, who might not experience maybe the negative impact of lack of diversity. It can be challenging for them to A, have the conversation, B, make changes, and C, actually be accountable for those changes. And so my mission is to simplify it. My mission is never to embarrass or shame anyone or an organization. Rather, what I'd love to do is be able to have a chat just like this with somebody who has influence, maybe some seniority, or who is a decision maker, and just have a human-to-human conversation about how they really feel about it. What is the challenge? And then make some simple suggestions that they can use straight away so that they can start making changes in their organization.
Absolutely. What are some of the examples of changes that you've initiated or you recommend to people?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have worked, for example, at the moment, we're working with a large organization in the events industry. And one of the things that we've recommended when it comes to their hiring and recruitment practices is that they proactively partner with and contact diverse networks and communities. So what that means in reality is they go out there, they make a list of communities that are made up of different people, whether they are disabled persons, individuals who may have different sexuality, or individuals who are of color. Reach out to those networks, be very open and transparent, and say, hey, look, we are looking to hire different people. Is there a way that we can partner with you, get to know your community or your audience so that we can show them and tell them what job openings we have? It's something so simple.
Right.
But it does require you to make a little bit of effort and maybe not rely on your usual recruitment agency, for example, who may not have access to those communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, one thing that I've observed, and it's good, obviously, that we're finally talking, especially in America, about the African American community. There is a dichotomy there for me. It's not only the African American community; it's the Asian, it's Latino, it's LGBTQ, it's every minorities that actually need to be included, and in the same time to avoid having those silos and that everybody's fighting just for their minority, but for the common purpose above all of this.
Yeah, and this is why the conversations are so important because, for the most part, if we're talking about, we can split it into two, into personal conversations and then conversations that are happening within businesses and organizations. In both of those spheres, there is a common good. There is an overall positive outcome if every individual human being feels valued, respected, and included. And I think without the conversations, though, it's very difficult to identify that.
Absolutely. I can't wait for the time, as Ellen DeGeneres would say, where people we will go back to judging people only by the type of car they drive.
Exactly.
So, transitioning from the corporate world to having your own business.
Yes.
What was going on in your mind? Why did you decide to start your own business? What are the challenges that maybe you were not expecting?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, I actually always wanted to run my own business, but my family expected me to, read law at university and go into a corporate career. So that's what I did. But I did get to a point where I felt like I'd learned enough from that corporate experience to add value to tech startups. And so for me, I thought back then, being very young and naive about starting your own business, that I would have more freedom, more independence, and I would be able to absolutely, control my income. So that's a naive person. I always say that, being an entrepreneur is like being an employee squared. Because really and truly, you then become answerable to your clients. if you start to hire employees, you become answerable to them as well. So for me, it's just a more intense employee experience, except I'm footing the bill all of the time. So the challenge is, the fact that, you have to be really astute. You have to be able to make good decisions under pressure. You have to love what you do. That is one thing, because it's hard. Being an entrepreneur is not easy, and it's never straightforward either. Yeah. Never, ever, ever straightforward. And so you have to really love what it is that you do, because otherwise you will consider absolutely maybe working for an organization again, or working for somebody else.
Absolutely. And I love this quote that says that an entrepreneur is somebody who's looking forward to work 80 hours per week to avoid working 40 hours for somebody else.
Yes.
And that's what it is. Yeah, obviously. The good thing is you're never going to fire yourself.
No, that's true. And also, look, I also love the fact that probably because I'm now 5 years in, I'm probably 5 years in now, I know I have the ability to bounce back from anything when it comes to business now, because I've done it. And so I know how to monetize my experience and skills. And that is a skill in itself. And it's having that ability to do that is really important, because, like many other business owners, last year really has taken a lot of businesses out completely. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know how to monetize your experience and skills, it is a struggle. It is a struggle. And so I have been able to come back from some really, really tough circumstances in business that I may not have been expecting and could not have predicted. Mm-hmm. But because I can monetize my experience and skills, I can keep going.
So how do you work on your mindset to be that strong?
That is a good question. So it's a combination of things, I'd say, and it's not always clean and tidy, right? So I always say this to people, that behind closed doors, I feel as much pressure and overwhelm as anybody else. Sometimes I don't know what's happening that day. Sometimes I'm not prepared for every meeting. And sometimes I have to say sorry. In fact, over the last 6 weeks, and probably for the next 2 weeks, I will be saying sorry to a lot of clients, because things happen. And so I've become very good at saying sorry. And that helps my mindset as well, because you have to take ego out of it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to be really humble, and you have to be really self-aware of what your strengths and flaws actually are. You have to be willing to make changes. If something doesn't work, you have to make that change, mm-hmm. even if it means you've invested money and time sometimes into a resource or strategy. If it's not working, you have to change. So for me, my mindset is a combination of I have a lot of coaching. So I have a sales coach. I also have a community of other entrepreneurs that I'm a part of. And in addition to that, I have worked very much on personal mindset. Very recently on Clubhouse, I was asked about this transition from employee to entrepreneur. And I was saying, look, if you have confidence issues, if you've had maybe traumatic experiences in the past, running a business will trigger all of those, because it's all about rejection in business. It's all about communication in business. You lose sometimes more times than you win. And so if you're not good in general with dealing with that uncertainty, the risk of being rejected at times by clients you don't win, of having clients communicate that they're not happy with something, of having to work later, be unseen, maybe never acknowledged, maybe you never receive gratitude. If you're not very good at that in general, business can definitely highlight those elements of your character and your personality.
You're making an excellent point. Never thought of that in those words, but absolutely. And you made me think of this meme I saw on social media recently. Apparently, I didn't listen to it because it was 1 a.m. Eastern that it started, but Elon Musk was speaking. Yes. And apparently somebody asked him, can you give some words of encouragement for entrepreneurs? And his answer was, if you need words of encouragement, you probably shouldn't be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and that was probably the one thing he said that day that was absolutely true, because there is nobody there to say to you, get up now, or work longer, or double check that spreadsheet. Go and double check that the numbers are correct. Risk manage. There's nobody there to, nobody but you rather can determine whether or not you stay in the game. Essentially, it has to come from within. And I will tell you this, I am a part of some great communities, and, but ultimately, even if I go to them to share something that's going wrong, something that's bothered me, something that's been difficult, it's still down to me. When we come off the phone or when I press end on the Zoom call, it's on my shoulders to do what needs to be done. And you have to be very driven from within. And I guess it goes back to that point we were talking about earlier about how you bounce back. That has to come from you. Other people can pat you on the back, tell you that they understand, tell you that you are a phenomenal person, you're a good example, you're a role model, but ultimately you have to be able to really retrieve that grit, that fire in your belly when you need to, in order to make it and survive in the business.
Totally. That's exactly the way to look at it. Absolutely. No, and you look at, being in the meetings and event industry, being faced with all these uncertainties. I was reading recently, like 39% of the job loss here in North America, in the US at least, it's in our industry. Yeah. But then I look at what I had in the past, like a volcano erupting and closing the entire airspace in Europe. There's always something, which is, by the way, something that I personally thrive on, the unexpected.
Yes.
And you have to think about strategy. You have to think about sales, about marketing, about personal development, about finances, about teams, about action plan, about accountability, everything. That's a very complex environment.
It is, especially, and the other thing is as well that, I've been mulling over a lot recently is kind of, what do I really want? What do I want as the business owner, as the entrepreneur? Because sometimes the decisions that we're making don't align with what we've said we want. And an example of that, for example, is the difference between scaling your income and scaling your company. They're not the same.
No, absolutely.
And they require different skills, different resources, different time and energy, and also result in different outcomes for you as the business owner. Because if you want to scale your income, you can do that without working more. But if you're scaling your company, you just can't be a part-time CEO. It's just not how it works. And so you have to understand what you really want and understand what the implications of that are.
Absolutely. And it made me think of two previous episodes that we had on this podcast. One is somebody wrote the book, The Company of One.
Yeah.
Who intentionally want to scale somehow his revenue, but doesn't want to scale the company. And then you have at the other side of the spectrum, scaling up, where Vern Arnish is saying, okay, that's about scaling the company and the revenue and everything. And to your point, it is not right or wrong. It is what it is that you want, and how are you going to put your energy now?
Absolutely. And that's a decision that I've had to revisit annually to make sure that the decisions that I'm making align with what I say I want. And I think that is probably also a big piece of advice I can give to people. If you want to make more money, you don't have to create a company or scale a company, rather. You don't. It's just understanding how you can make that happen, and how you manage all of the elements that go with that. Because the reality is you're going to have to pay somebody to help you, but it's all about how it's done. So those are some of the hard lessons that I've learned over the last 5 years.
Yes, absolutely. So, and the last part of our conversation today, so we spoke about diversity and inclusion. We spoke about starting your own business. Obviously, it's the online events. That's what EventMind, your company, does. But also in this new environment, if I would have told you, I would have asked you 2 years ago, Ashanti, what are you going to focus on in 2020? I'm not sure that you would say, I'm going to go full house into virtual. But here you are. You're also a judge in the Eventex Award, Virtual Event Institute Awards. So what about online events? How did you come to that? What are the practice that you're looking at?
So funny enough, my kind of foray into online events was pre-COVID because, again, as a young, naive entrepreneur, you have to find a way to stand out. And at the time when I first left corporate, I was a consultant, and there were lots of other marketing and business consultants out there. And so the key was me making sure that I stood out. And so one of the first things I started doing was live streaming. So I would live stream and I would obviously teach people how to do something, share my knowledge on something, and then sell my service. And I was doing that in the very early days. And then obviously Facebook Live came out. So I started using Facebook Live a lot on my personal profile and in Facebook groups. And then what happened was other companies started asking me, how on earth do you live stream and sell? And so that's how I got into helping companies create essentially online experiences, events, so that they could build community and sell. So I was doing that anyway by proxy because it was free. And so from a marketing perspective, there was no expenditure except my time to live stream and interview people and teach something and then tell them, hey, drop me a DM and we'll talk about how I can help your business. And so what really has changed now since COVID is the main thing really is that now there's much more technology that's a little bit more sophisticated than a live stream on Facebook. There's much more technology available, but also the rest of the world realizes the sustainability benefits, the low cost launch elements of online events as well. And so the world is forced right now to work remotely and therefore have to come up with alternatives to bringing people together in person.
Very good point. And again, to me, it's finding the right balance. I totally got the sustainability aspect for sure and the cost aspect. But it triggered one of the conversation we had years ago at the MPI European Conference in London. And I remember somebody said, in terms of sustainability, we recommend that nobody outside of Europe would fly to attend the European conference. And I went like, really? Because then you're missing the essential part, which is people from all over the world coming together, exchanging with each other, having conversation, building project together, which I don't believe you can achieve the same way online. So it's the balance between the two, and definitely online events are here to stay, and I'm sure that cooperation will integrate that. But how do you see the use of online events in a post-pandemic world, and what are your recommendations for organization with that?
Look, the reality is online events will become a part of, a digital and social strategy. Mm-hmm. That's all. It will be much more mature, informed, and a little bit more sophisticated than it was pre-COVID. So, you had companies that were using, social media to live stream. You had companies that were storing content of different types in a place and allowing people to access that content in and around other events that were happening. And so there's not really anything new. But what is new is, you now can have global insights on attendee behavior. You can now integrate online events into a marketing strategy, into a recruitment strategy, into a brand activation strategy in a way that wasn't being done readily pre-COVID. So I think what we'll see post-pandemic, whenever that happens, is that these things will just become a part of BAU. So we may not even use terms like virtual events, online events. It will just be the marketing strategy for X launch. And in that breakdown, you will see what looks like or could be defined as a virtual or online event. I think that's what we're going to see. I've seen fashion brands now launch a whole season online, and that wasn't something that was done before. We've also seen FMCG brands use online events to recruit en masse. And so you can see the different ways that online events can shape up to help companies to build community, help companies to engage their employees, and of course, yes, to create and generate revenue in the business as well. I think the other thing that we're going to see in the future is that now the access that a new market competitor or a challenger brand has now is far easier, right? Because ultimately, with all of the technology available, if you do a bit of research, you can absolutely launch a brand, essentially. Right. And if you're good at building relationships, if you also know how to wield social media, I think those challenger brands have a very good chance of taking a slice of the pie that some of the more established companies who are slower to convert to digital and slower to use social media, I think they have a really good chance of taking a slice of that pie now.
Interesting. So you're good at building relationship. You're good with social media. So which brand are you launching now?
Well, I tell you, one of the things we are doing that I'm really, really excited about is that, from the very beginning for me, because I am such a tech geek, we've made sure that we've stayed as unbiased as possible. And so when we've made recommendations for technology, we don't get paid by the technology company to do so. Mm-hmm. And that allows us, obviously, to make sure that we are recommending the best technology for our clients. But the really exciting thing, by the time people listen to this particular episode, is that we are launching a global directory of event technology companies. So we have a database, quite an extensive database of companies that we obviously contact when we have client briefs. And I've really thought long and hard, because there are lots of independent planners. There are also lots of venue booking companies who pivoted into finding the right technology for their clients. Of course, there's agencies who haven't built their own technology. And then the buyer persona at the moment has changed. It's not just traditional meeting planners, exhibition organizers, conference producers who are looking for this technology. You could be the head of HR, the head of marketing, the head of recruitment now, who has to figure out how to take your event online. And hopefully people realize by now that it's not just about one piece of technology, it's about your stack, as it's called. Mm-hmm. It's about a cluster of technologies that help you deliver that online experience. And so what we decided to do was launch a global directory which was accessible. And we're in a great position to do that because we are unbiased. And so we will be listing every single event technology company out there in one place where it's searchable by key filters, so that individuals can truly get a sense of what the market looks like.
Love it. And what is the URL for that?
I will share that with you, so it's in the show notes. Okay. We haven't pushed green yet, so but that's a bit of an exclusive. But by the time you listen to this episode, we would have launched that global directory.
Awesome. Good to know. Excellent, Ashanti. Thank you so much for your time now. Hopefully we're going to meet face-to-face this year. And when we meet, let's say maximum 1 year, I bring a bottle of champagne. What are we going to celebrate?
Making it through. I think these days you can just count your blessings for staying, healthy and safe, because that's not everybody's reality.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Absolutely. Absolutely. How do people get in touch with you?
Absolutely. I always say, come and find me on LinkedIn. That is my place, really, first of all. And of course, you can always search me on Clubhouse if you do have access to Clubhouse. But if you definitely want to chat and see some great content about event technology, LinkedIn is the place to come and find me.
And your LinkedIn is www.linkedin.com/IN/Ashanti BD. So ASHANTIBD.
Yes. Nice and simple. Or you can just type my name in and I will come up. There aren't that many Ashanti Bentil-Dhews on LinkedIn at all. So you can't really miss me.
Awesome. Ashanti, thank you so much for taking the time. Truly enjoy our conversation today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ashanti, for your time and sharing your experience. A fascinating discussion. Truly enjoyed it and learned a lot. If you want to get in touch with me, please reach out on LinkedIn, or you can join my Facebook group, The Business of Meetings, where we discuss everything related to owning, managing, and growing your business in the meetings and event industry. Thank you.